By the end of January, 4 species of plants were in flower, and 5 or 6 mosses had already adjusted their hoods and were in the prime of their life. But the flowers were not sufficiently numerous yet to affect greatly the general green of the young leaves. Violets made their appearance in the first week of February, and toward the end of the month, the warmer portions of the plain were already golden with myriads of flowers and rayed composite. This was the full springtime. The sunshine grew warmer and richer, new plants bloomed every day, the air became more tuneful with the humming wings, and sweeter with the fragrance of the opening flowers. Ants and ground squirrels were getting ready for their summer work, rubbing their benumbed limbs and sunning themselves on the husk pile before their doors, and spiders were busy mending their old webs and weaving new ones. In March, the vegetation has more than doubled in depth and color. Claytona, calandria, and a large white gilia, and 2 nemophiles were in full bloom, together with a host of yellow composite tall enough now to bend in the wind and now wavering ripples of shade. In April, plant life as a whole reached its greatest height, and the plain overall its varied surfaces was mantled with a close furred plush of purple and golden corollas. By the end of the month, most of the species had ripened their seeds, but undecayed still seemed to be in bloom, with the numerous corolla-like involucraries and whorls or chaffy scales of the composite. In May, the bees found in flower only a few deep-set liliaceous plants and agronomas. June, July, August, and September is the season of rest and sleep, a winter of dry heat, followed in October by the second outbloom of at the very driest of the year. Then, after the shrunken mass of leaves and stalks of the dead vegetation crinkle and turn to dust beneath the foot, as it has been baked in the oven, Hemizona virgota, a slender, unobtrusive little plant from 6 inches to 3 feet high, suddenly makes its appearance, in patches miles in extent like a resurrection of bloom of April. I have counted upwards of 3,000 flowers, 8 heights of an inch in diameter on a single plant. Both its leaves and stems are so slender as to be nearly invisible at a distance of a few yards. And amid so showy a multitude of flowers, the ray and disc flowers are both yellow and the same as purple in texture of the rays, and rich and velvety like the petals of garden pansies. The prevailing wind turns all the head round to the southeast, so that in facing northwestward, we have the flowers looking us in the face. In my estimation, this little plant, the last born of the brilliant host of the composite that glorified the plain, is the most interesting of all. It remains in flower until November, uniting with 2 or 3 species of wiry ergonomes, which continue the floral chain around December to spring flowers of January. Thus, although the main bloom and honey season is about 3 months long, the floral circle, however thin around some of the hot, rainless months, is never completely broken. How long the various species of wild bees have lived in the honey garden, nobody knows, probably ever since the main body of the present flora gained possession of the land. Toward the close of the glacial period, the first brown honeybees were brought to California, are said to have arrived in San Francisco in March 1853. A beekeeper by the name of Shelton purchased a lot consisting of 12 swans from someone at Aspinwall who had brought them from New York. When landed at San Francisco, all the hives contained live bees, but they finally dwindled to 1 hive. which was taken to San Jose. The little immigrant flourished and multiplied in the bountiful pastures of the Santa Clara Valley, sending off 3 swarms. The first season, the owner was killed shortly afterwards, and in settling up to his estate, 2 of the swarms were sold at auction for $105 and $110 respectively. Other importations were made from time to time by the way of the isthmus, and through great pains were taken to ensure success. About one half usually died on the way. 4 swarms were brought safely across the plains in 1859, the hives being placed in the rear end of a wagon, which was stopped in the afternoon to allow the bees to fly and feed in the floweriest places that were within reach until dark, when the hives were closed. In 1855, 2 years after the time of the first arrival from New York, a single swarm was brought over from San Jose and let fly in the great central plain. Bee culture, however, has never gained much attention here, notwithstanding the extraordinary abundance of honey bloom and the high price of honey during the early years. A few hives are found here and there among settlers who chance to have learned something about the business before coming to the States. Most sheep, cattle, and grain and fruit are the chief industries, as they require less skill and care, while the profits thus far have been greater. In 1856, honeybees sold here for $1.50 to $2 per pound. 12 years later, the price has fallen to 12.50 cents. In 1868, I sat down to dinner with a band of ravenous sheep shearers at a ranch on San Joaquin, where 15 or 20 hives were kept, and our host advised us not to spare the large pan of honey he had placed on the table, as it was the cheapest article he had to offer. In all my walks, however, I have never come upon with a regular bee ranch in Central Valley like those so common and so skillfully managed in the southern climates of the states. The few pounds of honey and wax produced are consumed at home, and scarcely taken into account among the coarser products of the farm. The swarms that escape from the careless owners have a weary, perplexing time in seeking suitable homes. Most of them make their way into the foothills of the mountains or to the trees that line the banks of the rivers where some hollow log or trunk may be found. A friend of mine, while out hunting on the San Joaquin, came upon an old coon trap, hidden among some tall grass near the edge of the river, upon which he sat down to rest. Shortly afterward, his attention was attracted by a crowd of angry bees that were flying excitedly about his head. When he discovered that he was sitting upon their hive, which was found to contain more than 200 pounds of honey, out in broad, swampy delta of the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers, the little wanderers have been known to build their combs in a bunch of rushes or stiff, wiry grass, only slightly protected from the weather, and in danger every spring of being carried away by the floods. They have the advantage, however, of a vast extent of fresh pasture, accessible only to themselves. The present condition of the Grand Central Garden is very different from that we have sketched. About 20 years ago, when the gold wasters had been pretty thoroughly exhausted, the attention of fortune seekers, not home seekers, was in great part turned away from the mines of the fertile plains, and many began experiments in a kind of restless wild agriculture. A load of lumber would be hauled to some spot on the free wilderness where water could be easily found, and a rude box cabin built. Then a gang plow was procured, and a dozen Mustang ponies, worth $10 or $15 apiece. And with these, hundreds of acres were stirred as easily as if The land had been under cultivation for years, tough perennial roots almost wholly absent. Thus, a ranch was established and on these bare wooden huts as centers of desolation. The wild flora vanish in an ever-widening circle, but the arch-destroyers are the shepherds, with their flocks of hoofed locusts sweeping over the ground like a fire and trampling down every fruit rod that escaped the plow as if the whole plain were a cottage garden plot without a fence. But notwithstanding these destroyers, 1,000 bee swarms of bees may be pastured here for every one now gathering honey. The greater portion is still covered every season with a repressed growth of bee flowers. For most of the species are annuals, and many of them are not relished by sheep or cattle, while the rapidity of their growth enables them to develop and mature their seeds before any foot has time to crush them. The ground is, therefore, kept sweet, and the race is perpetuated, though only as a suggestive shadow of the magnificence of its wilderness.